I want to welcome everybody, and this is our first live webinar from Immersa. We've been doing several pre-recorded webinars that we've been putting up on our website at immersa.ai/events. Go ahead and check that out. The conversation today is going to be around customer success. So if you have anything to do with customer success, you're going to love this discussion today. And my guest that's joining us today is Luke from currently at Outreach, but his prior experience includes doing some data and analytics work at the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force. You were at McMaster-Carr for some time doing actual warehousing, not data warehousing related work. And then Qualtrics, where you really took on how to scale up a CS organization, and then of course Outreach as well in a customer success role. So that was a quick introduction to what Luke does. My name is Aseem Chandra. I'm the founder and CEO of Immersa. We help you bring data together from your product side, from your CRM side, and help you make sense of which accounts are likely to churn, which ones are likely to grow, and how do you approach them to keep the conversation going. So if you'd like to learn more about Immersa, hit me up on immersa.ai and I will go from there. Okay, Luke, I'm going to hand it over to you. So first, before you even introduce yourself, were you in a fight recently? Because I see a black eye.
I'm not a huge guy. I'm about 6 feet, and every once in a while I try and sneak rebounds when I'm playing basketball. And I tried to sneak in behind about a 6'5" guy, and his elbow was right the same height as my eye.
Interesting. So that's your story. We're going to stick with it.
Yeah, that's what we're going with for now.
Okay, sounds good.
More than I lost a fight. Either way.
Either way, it works. Well, that shiner looks good on you. Makes you look like
right. I came home and my wife was she said, "You should ice that," and I said, "No, I want it to look cool."
All right. Let's talk a little bit about you. I mean, I kind of gave a quick readout of your career, but I know there's so much history, so much color there. So why don't you kind of take us quickly through it and help us understand sort of, from the Air Force to Outreach, there's a lot that happened in between.
For sure. So I started out my career in the Air Force, loved it, did a lot of data analytics around combat search and rescue. So I wasn't one of the cool guys with the beards doing really cool things. I was one of the nerds behind them. So essentially, how do we go and get off the ground? How do we have better outcomes using data analytics? Love that. I speak a couple East Asian languages. And so I worked in China for a while and said, I want to do that full time. The Air Force has a program where you do that. They picked me up for it, but they said, hey, you're good at learning languages. Why don't you learn Arabic? I did not want to be in the Air Force and know Arabic because that definitely changes your career. So that's when I got out. The funny thing is I talked to a lot of veterans and a lot of folks who are working at transitioning into customer success. And I didn't go directly to customer success. I moved. I think that you have to do a single pivot oftentimes in your career. And so when I say a single pivot, there are things you can change. And one I would say is industry and one is job function. Yeah. And so it's really hard to pivot industry and job function. And so for me, it was first I want to go learn about the commercial world. And so that's when I went to McMaster-Carr, and I went into an operations analytics type role because that could leverage my past experience. And then when I was there for a little while. Eventually, I felt like I was maintaining rather than building a company. And so then I moved to Qualtrics when it was a late stage startup, I would say. And I actually started out in support because again, I changed industry, but some of the math and the optimization was the same. And so that was, again, a single pivot. And then I wanted to get closer to revenue, which I'm super excited that we're talking about today, because I think that revenue is the lifeblood of a company and the lifeblood of any department. You have to tie yourself to revenue. And so I wanted to get closer to revenue. And so then I pivoted over to customer success. And so I think it's really important that people think about where is your end goal? And there's probably a series of pivots that have to get there. And I think oftentimes people try and make that double pivot, which can be a bit dangerous. So at Qualtrics, got to scale customer success, and then now at Outreach.
Awesome, very cool. So let's maybe. I think the idea of a single pivot, I couldn't agree more. And it's essentially how I've managed my career as well. Is you kind of change one dimension and not try to change too many things, and build on what you've done before and keep moving forward. But let's come back to your Air Force days, because I think that's a really interesting time and an interesting point in your life. We'll talk about customer success in a moment as well. But you mentioned you're using data and analytics in your Air Force days, and sort of how to improve. Well, I guess tell us more. Tell us more about what you were doing there. We've talked about this a bit in the past, but I'd like for you to bring it up.
Yeah. So really what I did was tactics optimization and as well as product development. So oftentimes there would be, let's say, something that our combat search and rescue folks generally run a tactic and it takes 6 minutes to get off the ground. Well, we need to figure out a way to be off the ground in 4 minutes because it drastically increases survivability. And so then it's like, well, how do we go and layer things together? How can we change our tactics to go and be safer? Or, we have a certain amount of assets. I wrote a thesis on this. This was actually a really fun project. Let's say we have a bunch of assets in theater, like airplanes and different things. And then you need to predict, how are we going to minimize the time to recovery if there's an incident? So let's say there's a firefight somewhere, and then you have injured people. How should you allocate all of your assets in a network so that you're going to minimize the time to recovery of that injured personnel? Super fun stuff.
Very interesting. When I think about the Air Force, I don't think in terms of product or data or optimization. Like, those are not words that first come to mind, but it's really interesting to hear your perspective. Okay, we have our first few guests that have just joined. So for Farron, Kelly, Michael, you guys, if you have questions, we want to hear from you. So feel free to pop into the Q&A section and ask your questions as we go. And I'll bring them up to you, Lucas, as we go through this. You don't have to follow the chat. I'll just bring it up to you. So the Q&A section is open. The chat session, I think, is disabled for this particular webinar. But feel free to jump in and ask your questions as we go through this. Okay, so from the Air Force to the real world in a commercial role, going into McMaster's, and tell us about like supply chain and warehousing. Obviously, the math carries forward. Like, there's a lot of, and an operational background carries forward. But what was kind of new and interesting about that transition for you?
It was interesting because, like, my goal has always in the Air Force was in outcomes that I would say were fairly, like, we had such an advantage, right? And I'm biased. I think the U.S. Air Force is the best Air Force in the world, but like, we have such a technology advantage and we play on kind of an uneven field. And so really it's about like how to not make mistakes so that you survive. When you get into the commercial world, it's all of a sudden like, how do I optimize and make trade-offs? Like, you don't make a ton of trade-offs in like combat search and rescue. It's like, how do we get out alive? Whereas the commercial world,
objective function is very clear.
Yeah, very clear.
Immutable.
Very clear. And now you're in a situation where it's like, okay, we can reduce the time to order delivery, but it will increase our errors in order. And then how do I balance that? So there's a lot more, in some ways, there was more judgment and decision-making because the objective wasn't incredibly crystal clear.
Interesting. So from there, you move on into a customer success capacity at Qualtrics. Now, Qualtrics, of course, for those of you not familiar, has done incredibly well. Essentially, a voice of customer company that really raised that particular neglected part of the software industry to a very elevated position. Company originated out of Salt Lake, is my understanding, from Utah.
Yep. Provo, but same-ish.
Okay, so your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then of course they were acquired by SAP and then spun out by SAP as an independent company. So tell us a little bit more about that experience. And this is where we're going to like to go a little bit deeper into the customer success side of things. What was the business like when you entered? What scale was it at? And particularly the CS team. And so what did you walk into?
Yeah, so when I joined customer success at Qualtrics, I'd say Qualtrics was probably about a 1,200 person company. So doing well, over $1 billion valuation, had probably 50 to 60 CSMs, didn't have a CS ops team. And so I built out the CS ops team. And then we were renewing, I don't remember the exact numbers, but we were renewing mid-ish 80s. And we had very strong goals that we wanted to get our gross renewal rate above 190, above 90, and our net retention rate above 125. What was interesting is we took a lot of different tactics to go at that and snipped a lot of data. So at Qualtrics, we had AEs, but we didn't have like a hunter farmer model. So we didn't have a growth AE overlay where they're dedicated to certain customers. And so we needed to try and find ways to get revenue out of CS. So originally what we did is we said, we'll incentivize our CSMs on, do they create opportunities? And then these opportunities we pass. And that sort of worked. The problem was they weren't great opportunities because they have a book of like 60 clients and you could just create an opportunity on all of those clients. Like, were they good? Didn't matter. You created your opportunities. So we had to go and change that as we moved on.
Got it. So 15 to 20 CSMs is sort of the starting point at where you started in that capacity. And then how long were you there? And as you were exiting, what was kind of the scale of the team?
I left in
I want to come back to the revenue part of that discussion.
Yeah, I left in 2021, early 2021, right after we were spun out by SAP. At that point, there were probably like 150 in CS, and we've been more tightly integrated with services. One thing that we noticed was that we had a siloed view of customers. So we were working in customer success over here, services were working over here. And so we combined a lot of that. Like, we still had an EVP of customer success, but that EVP of customer success started to roll up to a shared services leader. Brian Stuckey, who's in my mind, the best CS leader I've ever worked for.
Awesome. Got it. Luke, in terms of so you already mentioned that you were starting to go down the path of like, how do you create opportunities in the customer success role, et cetera. I hear a lot of debate on this issue. But on the one hand, customer success, if it's about, let's say you need to renew the account and help the customer be successful, to where there's greater adoption of the product and the renewals are a simple conversation as opposed to a protracted negotiation. That's one model for customer success. The other is go find me upsell opportunities, go find me cross-sell opportunities, bring those back to the sales teams or try to close them yourselves, et cetera. At that point, doesn't the voice of customer get lost? Like, does it become another selling organization? And I know there's viewpoints back on sort of both sides that, favor one model or the other, but what's your perspective?
I think that you have to be careful either way. But I think the purpose of customer success, people often get lost and they say it's about renewal or it's about customer health. And I don't think that's accurate. I think customer success is about optimizing the lifetime value of a customer.
Interesting.
So the method to do that is to drive customer health. And then the symptom for customer health and adoption is renewal and expansion. And so you have to focus on the primary root cause, which is the adoption and the usage. But then you have to go and treat the symptoms as well. Like, a medical professional will not just say, like, here's the root cause, I'm not going to go treat the symptoms, or I'm not going to go do the treatment. And so I think you root cause and then you do the treatment. So I think it is important that you come across as an advisor that is very much engaged in the customer's value. But then you have to find ways to almost offload the commercials, but it's got to be a smooth process. And if you're like, at the end of the day, if I'm a CFO and you can't say to me, I will give you $2 back for every dollar you give to me, well, I'm not funding your department.
Makes sense. I like the way that you just articulated that as, what's the metric? It's lifetime value. And then taking it all the way down to what's the symptom or how do you address that? So that's actually a very interesting framework to work off of. So lifetime value versus NRR, right? Like, we hear a lot of conversation about NRR, net revenue retention. How many, what was the account at when you got it? How much is it at the end of the year? Did it renew? Did it, downsell? Did it upsell, et cetera? Right? It kind of factors all of those elements in. And in some sort of instances, is even more important than say ARR, because, and particularly in the as you know, if you're headed into a recession or a down economy, it's like, how do you mine your existing install base, because the cost of acquisition of new clients is so incredibly high in those kinds of environments. What's your take? NRR versus lifetime value. How should people view that differently?
I mean, I think NRR is a component of lifetime value, and it's impossible. So you have to renew someone to get, that high NRR. So I think that you should be segmenting your customers based on not only ARR, which I think most companies do. Most companies will just segment on ARR, but there has to be some kind of potential segmentation as well. Right? If Microsoft signs a $10,000 license with me versus Al's hardware shop signs a $10,000 license, like, I should probably be doing something different with Microsoft than Al's hardware shop. No offense to Al's hardware shop.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Got it. Now, you managed and scaled large teams. A question that Michael just asked a few minutes back is, how do you create alignment around a common objective, right? So across the team, and what's sort of the process that you lead the team through to establish that objective, get buy-in from the team, and get everybody marching in the same direction?
Yeah, I think you have to go really high to a principled level of what are the company objectives? Because if you talk to CSMs and you start to say, we're going to create revenue, I think that it creates panic in CSMs, because they say, am I going to get a quota? Like, there's a reason I'm not in sales. That's not the lifestyle I want. So I think it goes back to, let's have a conversation around lifetime value. Let's have a conversation around net retention and what that means for you. I'm a big fan of incentives drive behavior. And so if I can say to a CSM who's maybe a little hesitant, well, if we get our net retention above 125, like, that does wonders not only for our multiple, but it helps your story in your career. I look at my career. My career has been greatly enhanced by being a part of Qualtrics. That story that I was able to tell, and then be able to join Outreach. I never would have gotten this job at Outreach, which I love, if I hadn't been a part of Qualtrics. And Qualtrics wouldn't have been what it was if we couldn't have had the high net retention and the high renewal rate. And so we always knew we had to get renewal rate above 90, and we had to get net retention above 125 to be what we wanted to be. And so I think linking all of that together and letting people know, like, yeah, it's for the company, but it's really, at the end of the day, people are motivated by what benefits them.
Interesting. So Luke, help me connect this. We're hearing about customer success ops quite a bit in the industry these days. I think you either were in that role or were managing that. I
was at Qualtrics
previously. Tell us a little bit about that, as far as what did that role entail? Because I think it's different. I'll ask my next question after you answer, but there's a lot of confusion about rev ops and sales ops and CS ops and whatnot. So I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on what did you do in a CS ops capacity? Yeah,
I think there's levels of maturity for a CS ops organization. I would say level 1 maturity is bringing visibility to data that CSMs need to do their job. Like, hey, here's the usage by customer, creating dashboards, and just getting all of that data in front of leaders. So we used Domo when I was at Qualtrics. So creating all these Domo dashboards that say, hey, here's your projected renewal rate, here's what it is, here's the usage, maybe here's some of the risk in accounts. I think that's level 1. And that's probably where, when I left CS Ops, I wish I could say I progressed beyond that, but that's probably where I left at CS Ops. I think level 2 is insights that drive actions. And so being able to say, here are your accounts that are likely to churn, and here is why, and here's what you should do about them. And here are your accounts that you could possibly upsell, and here is why, and here's how you should do that. I think, to me, that's a really advanced CS ops function. And what's awesome about that is, as an ops person, you're often not at the strategic decision-making table. But when you get to level 2 maturity of CS ops, you are the driver of strategy. And so I look, as a CS ops person, that's where I want to be if I want to drive my career. That's how I get my seat at the table.
I love the way you frame that. I think, we talk to a lot of people in operational roles, just given what Immersa does, and many in the customer success space. And And there is in fact, we ran a survey earlier this year with ops teams, and it is on our website. If anyone wants to go check it out, it's available, the results of it. But 70 different SaaS companies and PLG companies responded, and ops teams from those companies. And I think one of the key issues we learned was that ops people feeling like they don't have a voice or a budget or a seat at the table to drive strategy. And I think you've sort of this level 1, level 2, et cetera, maturity curve that you're describing here. It's a nice way to frame how to elevate yourself into that position. It really makes sense the way you just described it.
Yeah, if you go in and you say like, "Hey, run this, and I'm going to create more revenue," well, guess whose ear you now have? You now have the CRO's ear. You now have the leader of CS. Like you are in those conversations, and you've just made yourself invaluable.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so you mentioned, as you mature, the intention is to identify the opportunities and trigger some action. So let's talk about the identification of those opportunities. How did you go about that in your CS ops capacity? What was sort of the tool set, and what was the secret sauce and the methodology to approach that? Say, what are the opportunities in my account base?
Yeah, I wish I had a secret sauce. So a lot of it was just brute force. So a lot of it was, we would tell reps. So originally we started out with create opportunities, and we judge you on the amount of opportunities you created. That led to really bad opportunities. So then we started saying, okay, part of your bonus, we're going to tie to the amount of revenue that is closed that you originated the opportunity. So then we started to get good opportunities in there. What it incentivized the CSMs to do was to go look through their accounts and then have conversations about, another product or another use case, and then funnel that up. So that's where we started. I think it worked okay. What it did is the CSMs who had fewer accounts and were deeper embedded in their accounts knew those accounts really well. And so they could do it well. It was much harder for the reps that had 100+ accounts, and they were having more shallow discussions with those customers, or even like we had scale teams. Actually, I'll get to that in a second. But like the reps that had fewer accounts, they couldn't get as deep. And so that's where we had to start getting into the analytics. And so we would pull like customer use cases, and we would say, okay, similar customers as these customers are buying these products. And then we would give a list to those CSMs and say, these are the customers we believe should be targeted. Now, was it incredibly accurate? No, but we had to find a way to narrow it down. The other thing, and I apologize, I'm just rambling here, but the other thing that we had to go into was when we did scale customers. So at the end of the day, you have to get scale in CS, because that's another way of creating value, right? Because normal CS, your volume, your ARR goes up, and you assign a CSM for every, let's say, $4 million of ARR. You're never going to get margin that way. So you have to find a way to say, okay, now for $10 million of ARR, I'm going to assign one CSM. What we found when we did that was renewal rate didn't suffer, but expansion did. And so that's where we needed a lot of lean in from our data teams to go and figure out where that expansion should be.
Interesting. Got it. So one of the questions that I kind of draw some parallels here to growth marketing, and in fact, like prior to that, even sales operations roles, where you see in the sales arena, there's been a number of technologies that have sort of emerged around Salesforce, or HubSpot is kind of the core platform. But then there's a number of different data apps and engagement apps and AI tools and machine learning tools and whatnot. And so that's sort of elevated the position of an operations person in that role, where they're trying to bring all this information together, trying to make sense of it, and then generate these insights. And then, we kind of saw we're seeing a similar sort of movement with growth marketing, where, again, a lot of new marketing technologies have come up. There's this, complexity of go-to-market motions where it primarily used to be sales-led. Now it's product-led or marketing-led, or whole bunch of different new ways to go to market. What are the key trends in the customer success space? Like, what are you seeing there that sort of feels different from, say, when you first started your career? Like, how are forward-leaning CS people thinking about where they should be investing their time, resources, energy, looking ahead?
Yeah. There's a big push to get more programmatic. So I think for a long time, we've hired really smart people into CS that can be consultative. But we want to be more data-driven as we move forward. So oftentimes we get to a point, and this kind of works in the enterprise because you can throw dollars and heads at it, where we say like, hey, here's the risk in the account. I talked to their VP, John, who said this, and they can hedge that out. Well, when you have 100 accounts, or when you're trying to get margin in your customer success team, you have to be data-driven. And so that means you have to be more programmatic. So ops is taking an elevated role versus in the past, I think it was just go be an athlete and figure it out. You have to get programmatic. And that's where you're seeing like VPs of CS are people who can drive ops and the whole CS motion.
Got it. And as you think about in a CS leadership role, who are your closest stakeholders across in an organization? Like, who are the people that you work with the most closely, CFO side? But what are sort of to actually achieve the objectives in terms of NRR or LTV and so on? Like, who are the people you work across?
I would say the closest stakeholder is sales. Like you got to get really close with sales. Like that's at the end of the day, revenue matters. Also pretty heavily with professional services and support. Oftentimes what I've seen at companies I've been at is it's not always the product. Sometimes it's implementation or the customer knowing how to use it. We try and get through a lot of that in customer success, but if someone needs to get their hands on the product, that's not something that I would recommend customer success doing. And so professional services need to do that. So you have to figure out, are there gives and takes with the customer to get a professional services engagement in there? And then support, there's got to be a strong handoff process between customer success and support. You don't want your CSMs just managing escalations. Technical escalations all the time. Account escalations we should be managing, but not technical. The area where I think that there is room for improvement, and this may just be my experience, is the link with product. At the end of the day, I think CS should be a voice of the customer, but I personally have not done a ton of that. But maybe that's just a commentary on me.
Got it. Very helpful. So I heard sales, then the support and professional services side of things, and then product. In your experience, kind of the third area where there's opportunity for growth. Okay, so you mentioned this notion of data-driven approach to driving customer success. So let's maybe parse that a little bit to say, who do you turn to for getting access to the data, and what kinds of data, and what's the most relevant? I mean, there's like companies are swimming in data these days. Like that's usually not the issue, right? So what are some of the issues that you then have to tackle once you have so much data around you? Like how do what are some of the issues you've had to work with, and who do you have to work with from a role standpoint? Who do you have to work with to address those issues?
Yeah, I mean, you're really working a lot with CS ops, but you also, I would say you're working a little bit with finance, because CS ops, I think there's really two things that they should be telling you. Who is likely to churn and why, and then who is likely to expand and why. And then as a CS leader, my job is to go create playbooks and enable my team to go attack those different use cases. And then the third thing that I would say is, how does this impact my forecast? Like at the end of the day, it should be tied to commercials, because that matters. And that's where your finance team starts to get involved. Got it.
And your CS team, in order to figure out where's the opportunity for upsell or where there's risk in an account, what data sets are they tapping into to figure that out? Like what's kind of their methodology or their approach to figure that out?
Yeah, a lot of it is usage. Like how is the customer using it? Which features are the customer using? Have they upsold recently? How saturated are they? What's the white space or the green space, whatever space you want to call it. Yeah. What's that space on the account? How are like customers acting? So, is there some kind of similarity network? Those are the things that I've seen. but it can be tough. The problem is a lot of these models get really complex.
Mm-hmm.
And when they get too complex, you'll find exceptions and then you won't understand the exceptions. And so where I see these models fail is when you give a model to a CSM and you say, here are your likely to churn customers. And then they say, well, this one had a 5% likelihood to churn, but I knew for sure they were going to churn.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, so the model's not accurate.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of using the exception to prove the model. And so there's got to be clear reasons why, and they've got to be explainable to a CSM, because otherwise they'll just discount the model. Or if it's too complex, they'll say like, yeah, 70 variables. I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you can parse it down to a few variables, one, they know how to take action on it because they can say, okay, I need to change that, that, and that. And then two, when the model is inaccurate, which inevitably there will be exceptions.
Yeah.
They can understand why the model projected the way it did without discounting the whole model.
Interesting. So how do you get them to trust the data? I think that's kind of the point that you're bringing forward. And we see that again, we see that all the time in conversations with our clients that, and I think you just made a very key point, which is the exceptions actually, people kind of turn to the exceptions to either prove or disprove the model. And then that point, they make the call on whether they're going to trust the data or not. So how do you change that behavior in an organization to where, let's say you're rolling something new and you're trying to get people to adopt that approach, that new model that the CS team invested a lot to build out and pull a bunch of data from and so on. How do you change the behavior in a CS organization? What's the change management that's associated with it?
I think there has to be a lot of reporting back because people will have they just have, they like to look at the trees when they're in front of the trees. And sometimes you have to say, well, here's the forest.
Yeah.
And so you have to pull people back and you have to be hyper transparent about it. Like people can smell BS and you have to say, this is where we were wrong. This is where we were accurate. This is how much revenue and time we feel we have saved. I think just make it super simple for CSMs. Like CSMs are a bright bunch, I would say. Like I'm one, and so I'm a fan, but at the same time, like one, it's super simplistic.
Yeah.
And be able to say, look, we were right on 92% of these accounts. Here's where we were wrong. Here's what we're going to do going forward. Here's what you need to do as a CSM. You can't just go in and look blindly at the number. You have to go and validate. Yep. And then when you see something that is off, you have to push and say why it's off. And then that's how we're going to continue to get better.
Makes sense. Luke, I think it's so both Qualtrics and Outreach, your companies that have a very large number of customers. And what's and then CSMs, of course, map into those accounts and have a certain coverage ratio and a coverage model. And at some point, the data becomes database models become very valuable to understand because they have a very large account base. How do you tell which one's going to crit or likely to grow without like having conversations with them every day? Whereas, if you're an enterprise CSM kind of top segment, you know your 10 accounts and you know exactly what's going on there. So what's the value of data if you're in that enterprise segment? Like, where does it help in that context?
I've lived more in the SMB, so I may not have a good answer.
Okay.
But I think it's often like, I look at when we were at Qualtrics, you think like, how many Fortune 500 companies are there? There's 500. and you need to get in and saturate them. And so like now you're in 498 of the Fortune 500. Like, where are you going to go now?
Yeah.
Well, there's a ton of other businesses within the Fortune 500, right? Like we're in BMW North America. Yeah. Awesome. Well, how do we get in BMW Asia? How do we get in BMW here? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's valuable that we can show those leaders and make it really easy for them to become champions and say like, hey, here's the value you have gotten. And then we can let a CSM know, hey, now is probably a right time. They've gotten a ton of value. They look like someone who would be ready to expand into another business of theirs. Because it's really, that's in a lot of cases, that's almost a new customer.
Got it. Okay. So, I think we've kind of touched upon the role of data. Now, when you look at the enterprise segment, but when you look at the SMB segment, what are some of first of all, I would love to hear how you think about coverage ratios, because we hear all the time right now, particularly with companies saying, I want to move to mid-market, or I want to expand my account base, but I'm not adding any more CSMs. And this conversation comes up a lot. And so how do you think about coverage ratios and coverage models? And when a company takes that stance, how do you respond?
Yeah, right. So right now at Outreach, we're at about 1 CSM to about 3 million of revenue. And I feel like we would like to get closer to the 4 million of revenue number.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is, you look at your data and you almost A/B test and you see where, like, if this is my ratio, or if this is my ratio, what does my expansion renewal rate look like? Then in scale, so for accounts less than 40K ARR, generally, that's kind of the general rule anyway, we're at about 10 million to 1 ratio. And so one way to drive that ratio is to have automation. So we reach out to customers based on specific triggers. So, customer usage drops, or we see poor account health based on an automated audit. Then we're going to reach out to those customers. It feels proactive to the customer, but it's reactive to our team, which makes it more efficient. And then also creating assets for digital engagement. And those shouldn't just be used in scale. Those should go all the way across, right? Like we have these webinars that we do.
Yeah.
Then enterprise customers should go to those, but it should be linked back so the CSM knows when that's occurring. So I think that's another way to drive higher ratios, which I think we all want to do.
So what was interesting to me, you responded to the question, not in terms of the number of accounts, but in terms of the value of those accounts, or the total book of business. Is 3 million in SMB or 4 million in SMB kind of equivalent to, 10 million in enterprise, is sort of the way that you look at it?
I haven't. I think it's an interesting paradigm, right? Like, should we be looking at accounts or should we be looking at dollars? I think you get to a certain saturation point with accounts where you're not going to be able to handle them. The way our revenue breaks out at Outreach, generally 50-ish accounts will be about 3.5 million or so. But in the enterprise, that 3 to 4 million may be like 2 accounts.
Yeah.
I think that there's room in enterprise to go 6-8 million, depending on the accounts. But those accounts are also way more complex. Yeah. When I'm talking SMB, I probably have 1 organization. Like, I have a CRO that's doing things with their sales development reps, and that all rolls straight up. When I'm talking to Cisco or SAP, they probably have so many different organizations. So even though it's 1 customer, you really have a ton of clients.
Makes sense. Got it. Okay. Very cool. I want to kind of take the conversation into what are the tools in the CSM's tool belt to take action with an account. So I'll tell you the 2 that I hear the most often: QBRs and playbooks. Okay. Yeah. Let's unpack that a little bit. What else can a CSM do, and what's sort of the these particular tools have been around a long time. So what's kind of the modern way of thinking, and how do you expect these to evolve, or what are some of the new things that are out there that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think you have to have an operating rhythm for your CSMs. And generally, QBRs and playbooks, to me, are a portion of the operating rhythm. And your operating rhythm, in my mind, should be based around a value plan. So essentially, you come in, there's a reason a customer bought your software. They are trying to solve a problem. So you need to align on whatever that problem is with the most senior leader, the stakeholder, the one who holds the wallet and says, is this successful or not? Then there are probably some tactics that you're going to take to go solve that problem. So there's probably 3 to 4 things. Usually the problem, you align with your SVP or whatever. And then next, you're going to go, there's a director that's going to actually do it. So that director is probably going to give you 3 or 4 large projects type things. And then you're going to build out a project plan. And to me, that is your operating rhythm. Everything should tie back to the value plan. There should be recommendation meetings, and it almost turns CS into project management. You can say, at this point, we were supposed to have this done, and these are the results we expected to see. And then your QBR or EBR is not. So I've sat through QBRs that you just want to rip your hair out. because they're just boring and it's a marketing slide. And then it's like, here's how we've done. But it ties back to the project that you said was going to be your success. And so you can say, here's how we've progressed. We're doing well on this one, well on this one. This is where we need to make some changes. The changes we recommend making based on the customers and everything we've seen are A, B, and C. And now you don't even have to build alignment because the alignment was built in that value plan.
Got it. So how much time do you think CSMs spend on building QBRs?
A lot.
Okay. And
I think it's like, if it's like an enterprise QBR, you're going to spend probably like a week building that thing out. If you're maybe SMB and you have 60 clients, you're probably going to spend a day building this out. And that's a lot. And then sometimes customers don't care, if I'm being frank. And so you've spent a day building a deck that they honestly don't care about. Yeah.
Got it. Do you see any automated ways of triggering actions that customers would care about? So like QBR sort of get into this big deck and a big presentation and whatnot, but what's the operational cadence that can be established with clients, particularly in the SMB segment where you've got a lot of clients? You're not going to do QBRs with all of them. You're not going to spend a day. You don't have a day to spend with each one of them to build a QBR. So what's kind of the operating rhythm or cadence over there?
I love trigger-based actions. So one thing that we do at Outreach is we will go at certain time intervals, we'll evaluate customers and it's a super quick evaluation. I eventually would like to automate this. We haven't gotten there yet, but we'll look at their content, their organization, their CRM, and then their governance. And we'll rate them basically good, bad on those. And then we will send out Outreach as a sequencing tool. So we obviously use our own tool, but we'll rate them good, bad. And then based on their rating, we'll send them follow-up sequences that say, hey, you're doing great on these 3 things. You could use help on this one. This is what we recommend. Schedule a call with us. Very proactive to a customer, reactive to us. So I think that's one. The other one is usage and risk-based triggers. So we can see, I'm a big fan of statistical process control. This goes back to my warehousing days. You can look at all your sigmas and you can say this person's usage is outside of 3 sigmas of what I would expect up or down. And so now they've dropped, or they have rule of 6 down. Well, I'm going to go message them with this set message. And so now it's kind of telling you which accounts to go focus on. Got
it. Very cool. Okay, so we have another question here on the Q&A forum. So this is again from Michael asking the question. Early on, did you create an ops role to fulfill the reporting needs of the CSMs with a lot of accounts, or did you just coach your CSMs to do that for you?
I created an ops role, and that's where it was great. Problem was that's like the level 1 maturity of ops, reporting, and man, you can get bogged down in that, especially when reporting is spread out across the company. Like you have a rev ops team, you have a sales ops team, you have your CS ops team, because what can happen is the way we report a number is slightly different than the way that rev ops reports a number. And now we have incongruities and we're going into stand-ups. And so I probably spent a year bogged down in just how to report. Maybe I wasn't a good ops leader, but it'll bog you down.
Interesting. Okay. Well, great. Look, this has been incredibly interesting from my perspective, because if I were to look at, what we're building with Immersa is essentially a data platform that brings data from a bunch of different places and helps you figure out where there's risk in your account and where there's growth and opportunity in your account. So separately, I would love to show you what we're doing and your feedback straight back to our product team, because this is exactly the kind of stuff we need to hear. But I think on behalf of the audience here, super, super interesting conversation. I don't think we could have found a better guest for our first live webinar. So thank you for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Aseem. It was great.
Came in rocking that shiner, and you just laid out the knowledge bombs, and it was pretty fun.
Okay, awesome. I had a great time.
Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.